Hi crafty friends, it's Donna here, and I thought we'd give the Pantone colours of the year for 2021 a go today. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an Australian, currently living in Tokyo, who loves all things crafty. The Pantone colours of the year for 2021 are a beautiful buttery yellow and also a mid-grey. I had a little bit of a fiddle around with the colours that I own to find the ones that I thought were the closest to the images of the colours that I could find online, and the ones that I ended up landing on were Y05 and C5. I only own the cool and the warm greys, so there may have been a grey in the middle that was a better match, but that's not what I have in my collection. Today's video will be a little bit different to usual because I'm going to leave in a little bit more of the colouring and I'm going to have a little bit of story time. I have a most unusual tale of how I gathered my Copic collection, and I thought you might like to hear it today. But first, a little note about what we're doing. I've used a stamp from Paper Rose called Big Bloom, and I've stamped that twice in Copic friendly ink, in this case Memento Tuxedo Black. I've done it twice so that I can have a little bit of an experiment on one of them, just to see how the shading works. And I've also done a little bit of experimenting about what some of the yellows would look like if they had grey underneath them. Getting a deep yellow can be tricky, but one way to do it is to underpaint with another colour, like this grey. You may have also noticed the beautiful music in the background that was composed by my son Darcy. Please excuse any stray hairs that you see on camera. I'm doing my best to cut them all out, but I've recently had a big haircut, and it turns out that my shorter spirally hair has no respect whatsoever for gravity or for camera angle. So the story of my Copic markers. Several years ago now, I went to a Copic class at my local craft store and I loved what they could do, but they weren't something that I could afford to go out and get a bunch of. And so I bought a set of 6, 2 hair colours, 2 skin colours and E11, which I thought would do for the shadows on the face and the lightest bits of hair. And the 6th marker was the marker that I use in every card I make, which is the 0, the colourless blender. I decided that if I had the beautiful Copic markers for the faces and for the hair, then I'd be able to get away with other types of colouring or other techniques for clothes and flowers and other things, while I waited until I could afford more markers. And that's what I did for a long, long time. For a while, for birthdays or for Christmases, I would ask for Copic markers, and I had so many hours of pleasure just planning out which ones I wanted to have next and what would blend with what. Honestly, I think I've had more fun planning which Copic I would buy next than I have had using them almost. And then we came to the time that my husband and I were doing a garden in a house that we'd built. And initially we had a bobcat, a small tractor, doing the carting of all the soil. We had in total about 3 truckloads of gravel and of soil and of mulch and different things that needed to be spread around. And where we lived and where the house was, it was quite boggy and it was winter and it rained a lot. And the little tractor started getting bogged and started sinking down into the dirt. And then it started breaking pipes. And so it became apparent that that wasn't going to work as an option and that we were going to need to use our wheelbarrows and our shovels and move the dirt ourselves. So each morning we would get up and glove up and buy a bottle of Coke and start shoveling. And about 3 days into this, my husband got the flu and had to go home and go to bed. So I was continuing to shovel these 3 truckloads by myself. And at the end of the 2nd day, my husband, who was feeling very guilty about all the extra work that I was having to do by myself, suggested that I get an extra reward for my efforts. And so I jumped on this and suggested 2 Copics per hour. Looking back, I should have said 5. He would have agreed to anything. He was feeling so bad that I was doing all the shoveling. The next day, instead of meandering down to start shoveling at 9 o'clock, I found myself up and keen at 6 a.m, ready to go. And I shoveled, I think, 10 hours that day. And over the course of the next week and a bit, I cleaned up all the piles and got the gardens finished and earned myself a bunch of Copics in the meantime. And so that's how my little collection started. Then, about 2.5 years ago, we moved to Japan. Up until that point, all of my markers had been the smaller chow markers, because in Australia, even the chow markers are about $7 each, and the sketch markers were closer to $12, and so there was no way. Even with my cheeky offer of 2 markers per hour, I didn't feel that I could buy those ones. So when I moved to Japan, the land of the Copic marker, I started to slowly gather in a few more, and this time I bought the sketch markers. Each time I would go to Tokyo, I would take my little list and buy maybe 2 or 3 different Copic markers. And now while I'm in Japan, I'm hoping to be able to get the refills, because especially having the chows, they do run out quite quickly and need refilling. Unfortunately, at the moment, we are not catching any public transport, and I don't live anywhere near a craft shop. So at the moment, I'm just working with what I've got, but the days will come again soon, I'm sure, that I'll be able to go down to Tokyo and pick up 1 or 2 refills and get those organised before we head back to Australia. Let's get back to the card. I'm going around the image with my lightest greys, a little trick that I learned from Kathy Rakusin, to ground the image so that it doesn't look like it's floating in space. And then as I was doing that, I decided I'd quite like a little bit of a horizontal line there to make it look as though the bouquet was sitting on a shelf. I don't especially trust myself, especially with so much of the image coloured, and so I grabbed out that practice stamping piece and had a little go there first to make sure I knew what I was doing and that I would like the effect. Once the whole panel is coloured, I've cut that out with stitched rectangle die, and I'm going to stamp my sentiment. I'm not sure exactly where I want to put the image at this stage, and so what I'm doing is to stamp it onto a little piece of plastic, and then I can pick that piece of plastic up and audition the sentiment to work out where I'd like it. In the end, I settle on the bottom left. Now it's just a matter of popping that into my MISTI and using that plastic piece to line up the sentiment stamp. I then take my image out of my MISTI and just stamp it to check that it's definitely straight. In the first case, it wasn't. It was almost straight, but I wasn't happy with it. And so I've given it a little adjustment. I flipped around my grid paper and stamped it again. Finally, I have a little trick for you for lining up your panel on your card. If you take all of the padding out of your MISTI, you have a lovely recessed corner that you can line up both the paper and your cut panel in. If you're using glue, this is not so important because you can have a little bit of a wiggle after you stick it down. But today I used double-sided tape, and so I needed to get it right from the very start. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and to subscribe if you'd like to see more. Also, I'd love to hear in the comments whether you've enjoyed having the extra chat or whether you'd rather just listen to music and watch the card come together. Also, let me know if you've got any interesting stories about how you got your craft supplies. I'm not sure if there's anyone else out there that shoveled dirt to earn Copics, but I'd love to hear from you if you did.